Well, I must say I'm kind of having fun with this sermon series. I don't know if there are a lot of preachers who say they're having fun preaching through the summer, but I am. Diana Butler Bass's book, focusing on this concept of being grounded and how we reimagine or reclaim our sense of our faithfulness through our connection and relationship with the earth and with creation. And so last week I was speaking about the earth, and this week we're speaking about water. And it struck me that, similar to my confession last Sunday about not knowing that pickles were made from cucumbers, I've lived a kind of sheltered life. But I could argue that I have a similar relationship with water, because for my entire life, if I needed water, I went to the washroom or the kitchen and I turned the tap on, and there it was. It came gushing out. So it wasn't until an adult that my husband, Chris, and I, as I mentioned, we bought a farm property just south of Rockwood. Two city folks, I don't know what we were thinking. And so anyway, we got there, and of course realized after some time that the well on site was not really up to the demands of a modern family with 4 kids and showering every day and laundry and all what have you that you get into with that kind of a family situation. And so we had to have a new well dug. And I can remember the gentleman that came to the property with his little divining stick. And he walked the property with his sticks, and he pointed to a place where this huge modern drilling machine came in that Ron is probably very familiar with, and set up on our front lawn, and lo and behold, we had a well. And so that was all set up and connected with our ultraviolet light filtration system in the basement of our home, and we were good to go. Until one weekend we had family visiting with us, and it was a big event because my brother was getting married, so folk had gathered at our place, and then we were all heading into Toronto for his wedding, which was fine. So we had a lovely evening the night before, sitting out by our pool. We had a little fire pit, we had roasted marshmallows, and we had sticky fingers and the smell of wood fire, smoke in our hair. It was great. Went to bed, got up that morning. A couple of the kids went off to the gym. I went for my morning walk. And as I was walking back to the house, I heard this strange screech and thud and crash. And I came around the corner right in front of our house, and this car had driven right into the hydro box at the corner of our property. And fortunately, no one was injured. I think, judging by the clouds coming out of the car, that it was some teenagers having some weekend fun, and had wound up on our street because we were sort of isolated. And so they all kind of tumbled out of the car, not feeling too much of anything, I don't think, actually. So they started walking off, and they left their car like up in the ditch, plowed into our hydro box. And anyway, long story short, called the police. They came, looked after it. But the bottom end of the story was that we had no hydro, which, of course, if you have a well in the country, means you have no water. So there were 8 of us all trying to get ready for this wedding on this hot, steamy summer's day, smelling of wood fire smoke and sticky marshmallows and pool chlorine, and no water to be had. And so I called the kids that were at the gym and said, shower before you come home. That was they got off easy. And then the rest of us used what little bottled water we scrummaged around the house, and the gentlemen were able to shave at least with the bottled water, but that was about it. So we all joke now that we all arrived at this family wedding all reeking of wood burning, fire smoke and marshmallows and pool chlorine, because that was the closest thing we had to a shower that morning. So we all jumped in the pool. But, a funny family story. But the reality for so many in our world today is that's not a funny family story. That's the reality of each and every day of their lives. And I like to think that, well, maybe that's something that just happens in the third world. But that's not the case either, and we know that. Our indigenous people here in our own country are without water a good part of the time. And they have to have water brought in because where they live does not provide them with the water that they need. So as I ponder this whole subject of water and my faith, I realize that increasingly when I cover these subjects, I'm aware that it really is about relationships. It's about the relationship that we have with the earth and with our resources. And it's the relationship that we live out with one another in the world. And as people of faith, it's about our faith relationship as it impacts all of those other relationships. And I realize that the other part of our relationship with water is a justice issue, because everyone should have the water that they need. And so as I hop in the shower every morning, I think to myself, I'm so grateful. But at the same time, could I stop having that shower each day knowing that maybe somebody else needs the water more than I do? Certainly when I was on the Camino, water was a big thing. We had to make sure that we were very well hydrated. And actually I didn't do that for the first while, and I ended up with this strange rash from about my knee down to my ankle on both legs. And a gentleman 5 or 6 days into the journey said to me, "Oh, that's because you're not drinking enough water. You've got to drink more water." So the necessity of water and how important it is for our well-being really came home to me in that experience, and how grateful I was to arrive at a refugio or an albergue and be able to get refreshment and a fresh shower and feel human again. We all feel that way when you've traveled a long time, or you've got off a plane and you get home, and one of the first things you want to do is just jump in the shower because you just feel like you need that refreshment. And it's something we do every day, and so often we take that for granted. Well, I realized that a couple of weekends ago there was an event here in Guelph called Water Stock, and I know I did see Jill and Peter Gill from Harcourt, but it was a great event that was held in Erin, and it was to lift up and promote the issues of water in our own community. So again, when we think in terms of some of the water issues being something that's happening far, far away, well, that's not the case. That's happening right in our own neighborhood. And any of us that drive down to the 401 on a regular basis know that we go by Aberfoyle and we go by the Nestle plant there. And that's where they're bottling literally thousands and thousands and thousands of liters of water every day to be sent off elsewhere to be sold. And that water is coming from our ground source, and that level really cannot be maintained at the pace in which it is being used now. And so there's a program that's put by the Wellington Water Association. It's called Water for Life, Not Profit. And so I thought I'd share with you a few of their top issues. They say no to Nestle in Wellington County. So you may have already signed one of the petitions that are around in our neighborhood at various vendors and places, and you might see homes that have a blue ribbon around their tree. That's in solidarity with folk that are trying to stop having the water bottled and sold from Aberfoyle. And then also, of course, the government is involved in this because they give the permits for that water to be used. And so something that I hadn't really thought of, the fact that when we purchase bottled water, like there's some way in which there's been permission given for that. And as our Indigenous people would know, water is sacred. It's not really something to be bought and sold. It's a right for every human being on this planet to have the water that they need. And so when we purchase water, we've been sort of brainwashed, I think, to believe that it's better than what you get out of the tap. But so often, it's just the same thing that you're getting out of the tap. It's just put in a fancy bottle, and you're paying for it. Now, we do pay for water here in Guelph, but that's more for the infrastructure that's provided to give us the clean water that we have. But the idea of selling water for an Indigenous people, that's just bizarre. That's because it's not ours to sell. We don't own the water. It's a gift of the Creator. We don't sell that. And we don't prevent somebody else from having that resource if they can't afford it or they don't have access to it. So it really helped me to look at the whole subject of water with new eyes and a greater perspective of things. So there are ways in which we can support water being for life, not for profit. So whether it's you sign one of those petitions, or you put one of those blue ribbons out the front of your house, or you stop buying bottled water. I know my son has said this to his friends before. I get more upset if he walks in the door with a 6-pack of bottled water than a 6-pack of beer. He knows me well enough. And I realized too that there was something that was lifted up in the book Grounded by Diana Butler Bass that we're reading through this series. She commented that when that Malaysia airline went down and they were doing the search for the wreckage of the plane, all their searches, of course, kept coming up empty. And then one day they were so excited because they thought they had found an area of debris in the ocean that they thought might have been this downed airliner. It turned out it was more or less an island of garbage. It was just floating in the ocean. And it was such a solid mass that they could actually pick it up on their instruments. They thought it could have been the wreckage of the airplane. Water, like water bottles, plastic, refuge, doesn't sink right away into our waters, but eventually it does contaminate them, impacts our sea life, and that impacts us. Something else I learned walking on the Camino in relation to water was so often when we got to a town, we often had to cross a river before we got to the town, because it made sense that villages and towns were built close to water because you needed water for everything, whether it was to run a mill or if it was transportation of goods and trade. Guelph here was a great place of commerce and trade because of the river, because of the Speed River. And so water is very important in that sense. And I remember walking along some of those waterways and over the bridges into the town, and I realized every time I walk over the bridge down our river that I walked when I get downtown from the old university area, I think of how long that one bridge, it's been there since, I can't remember the exact date, but 18 something, do you remember? I'm trying to think when. Yeah, 1886 or something there. So, I mean, having those bridges, that really was a sign of the commerce and a vital community and the importance of that water. And so often when I grew up, I mean, there were some creeks and stuff that I had access to, but many of them were lined with cement, we had lived through, I think Hurricane Hazel was a little bit before my time, but I remember hearing the stories about the Humber River overflowing and all the damage that caused. And so after that, there were lots of places where they lined the riverbeds with cement, right, to kind of aqueducts or whatever to try to keep the water contained. But what I learned from Dinah Butler Bass is that there's an area on where the river meets the ground or the riverbank, and it's called the RIPA, the riparian zone. And it's a very critical part of nature. It actually acts as a filter. It slows down the flow of the river. It helps to stop erosion from the sides of the river. And then it also acts as a way of an area where different parts of wildlife thrive. So it's a really integral part of how the whole system works. So you can imagine that if you cement the sides of that, or build up walls or whatever that we do to make rivers safe or more habitable for us, it in fact excludes much of the wildlife and the purpose of why that riverbed was there and why it worked the way it did. So there's just so much to learn for a city girl like me about water and how water works in our lives and how we rely on water for our health and welfare. Something I didn't know is that 70% of the earth is covered in water. 70%. We call it earth. Somebody said we could call it ocean. There's more water than ground on our planet. And I find it really interesting that as human beings, we carry approximately 70% of water in our bodies. So there we are, back to that relationship. There is a connection that we have with all of creation. And we can't harm one part of creation without somehow causing some disrepair or destruction in another part of creation. So I realize it's not just about being a good steward or environmentalist. It really is a faith issue for us to be concerned about water. And I just want to share with you a couple of things that I have here. One is, this Bible was given to me by a friend, actually my cousin. It's a New Revised Standard Version, but it's called the Green Bible. And it was actually published by a group of theologians who realized that the world in which we live today, the environment has become such an important issue. And they say, as I've been realizing myself, that so many people think, well, the church isn't relevant anymore. What does it mean really? What does it make a difference for you to be a Christian in the world today? But they're actually saying, in fact, it's almost as if the Bible turns out to be amazingly relevant right now. He writes, with over 1,000 references to the earth and caring for creation in the Bible, the message is clear. All in God's creation, nature, animals, humanity, are inextricably linked to one another. And as God cares for all of creation, so too we cannot love one dimension without caring for the others. We are all called to care for all that God has made. It's almost as if the Bible were waiting for this moment to speak to us. There's so much in here that's all about caring for the earth and caring for one another, and we can't do one without the other. And as I said, it is an issue of justice, what we do with our creation. Amos chapter 5, the prophet said, here's what the prophet Amos says, "Let justice thunder down like a waterfall. Let righteousness flow like a mighty river that never runs dry." Sometimes if we read the news, we think, well, what can we possibly do now? It's almost as if people are talking like, well, it's too late now. There's nothing more we can do to save the earth or save our resources. We've just depleted them too much, and we're not doing enough fast enough to help it to be replenished. But hear the words of the prophet Isaiah in chapter 35. "Imagine the wilderness whooping for joy, the desert's unbridled happiness with its spring flowers. It will happen. The deserts will come alive with new growth budding and blooming, singing and celebrating with sheer delight. The glory of Lebanon's cedars and the majesty of Carmel and Sharon will spill over to the deserts. The glory of the Eternal One will be on full display there, and they will revel in the majestic splendor of our God." Sounds hopeful to me. So with confidence and hope in this message, strengthen those with feeble hands and shore up the weak-kneed and weary. Tell those who worry, the anxious and fearful, take strength and have courage. There's nothing to fear. Look here, your God. Right here is your God. The balance is shifting. God will right all wrongs, and none other than God will give you success. God is coming to make you safe. Then such healing, such repair. The eyes of the blind will be opened. The ears of the deaf will be clear. The lame will leap like deer, excited. They will run and jump tirelessly and gracefully. The stutterer, the stammerer, and the tongue of the mute will sing out loud and clear in joyful song. Waters will pour through the deserts, and streams will flow in God-forsaken lands. Burning sands and hardened wastelands will become pools shimmering with life. The thirsty ground will drink deep from refreshing springs. Abandoned villages where predators once lurked will become grassy playgrounds. Dry, arid land will turn lush and green. And the road to this happy renovation will be clearly signed. People will declare the way itself to be holy, the route sacred. There's so many images in that passage that just resonate for me as a person of faith. It's a calling. It's a calling for me to be conscious of how I use the resources that are a gift to me. It's a calling for me to respond and take action and to act in ways that are kinder and gentler to the earth. It's about choices that I make, simple things like what laundry detergent I might use, whether or not I buy that bottled water, whether or not I sign that petition to stop bottled water from being produced. There's so many ways in which the actions that I take at times may feel like it's just a drop in the ocean. But it isn't. If you leave your tap dripping throughout the night, you realize you've given away maybe a whole sink full of water come morning. Everything that we do counts. And I think as people of faith, we need to wrestle with what that means for us to live out that faith in a world that is crying out for this renewal and for this regeneration, for this awareness of how we are harming what has been created as a gift for us. I think that each of us are called to do what we can to protect this creation that has been gifted to us and to care for one another, that all have the right to water and resources, things that we might take for granted each and every day. Water is for life. Jesus promised that living water, but only if we are good stewards of it. We have a part to play in that creation. Amen.